So feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Cool. Sounds good. So, sorry, I got to move all the stuff around here. Hang on just one second. I got too many
Definitely.
things.
Too many Zoom
Too many. Exactly.
windows.
Um, there we go. So I hopefully everyone can see this.
2 more
Uh,
seconds, still waiting. There you go.
there we go. Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, thanks everyone for making the time and thank you for the invite. I'm excited to talk about this project, Triple R of one study from Trafimow and Hughes. I write the name more often than I say it, so I always have to be careful of the pronunciation. Um, so yeah, my name is Sean Rife. I'm a professor of psychology at Murray State University in Kentucky in the United States, and I'll just go ahead and jump right into it. This is a project that well, I'll jump the gun a little bit here. It took over 9 years to complete. But it got started uh, in its earliest form back in 2016, and is basically examining a component of terror management theory. So, for those of you who don't know, I won't assume too much knowledge here. Terror management theory is a theory that's in social psychology that basically it goes back to the work of a cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker, who um, has this theory about death, the importance of the fact that human beings are uniquely aware of their death, the fact that they will die. And the idea is that if you make people think about their death, that changes their behavior or their cognition. For example, making them more likely to endorse cultural worldviews, which are sort of a kind of immortality. And also as it relates to self-esteem. So there's this literature on TMT and its relationship with self-esteem. But the theory is relatively, I mean, it's at this point relatively old. It goes back to the mid 80s. A lot of studies getting started sort of in the early 90s. And basically this project, we did this project because it's one of those theories that is sort of controversial, depending on who you talk to, and seemed to be ripe for interrogation. Certainly back again in 2016, where we're sort of reevaluating all things social psychology, and to a large extent still are. Um, and this was a major undertaking. I didn't realize at the time how much of a major undertaking it was, in terms of the amount of work, but also the amount of time that it would actually take to complete. So I'll just sort of go over the what we did, and then I'll take some time and discuss sort of lessons learned or maybe recommendations, and leave a few minutes at the end for some questions as well. Okay. I want to just sort of get started here by just noting that this doing this project was actually originally the idea of one of our students here at Murray State. So we're a predominantly undergraduate university. We have a graduate program in the psych department, but most of my interactions are with undergraduates. And I had a student, Quinn Lambert, who had been doing some reading on terror management theory and was sort of interested in the intersection of that and this replication crisis thing that Dr. Rife is always talking about. And so initially, Quinn came to me and said, "Hey, I think we should try to replicate um, one of the early terror management theory studies from this '94 paper that's commonly referenced as sort of the one of the original studies." And we initially submitted to replicate again one of these early original TMT studies. But this is actually going back a little bit to when Dan Simons was the editor in charge of this process at Perspectives on Psychological Science. Um, that was where the triple R's were being published. And he actually knew that the Mini Labs project that Rick Klein heads up was actually doing the exact same study. They were actually doing a multi-site triple R of the same study. And we now know we didn't know at the time, but since that paper came out in Collabora, and some of you may have seen it, uh, the answer seems to be to this question of can we replicate key findings from one of TMT's earliest experiments? The answer, according to them, is probably not. And so, Quinn and I kind of went back to the drawing board and so said, okay, well, what are some of the more important, elements of this theory that we could interrogate? And we came down to this question of a time delay. So this is what's sometimes referred to as the death suppression rebound hypothesis. And that just posits that if you make people really aware of their own mortality, there will be a brief period where they will suppress that awareness of their mortality, and then it will rebound. And you want to try to measure your DV, during this rebound period. So you want to insert a delay in between making people aware of their own mortality and measuring whatever outcome you're measuring. And so often, in terms of this mortality salience thesis, often like the outcome is like endorsement of cultural worldviews, endorsement of religious norms, restrictive norms around sex, that kind of thing. So we actually said, all right, well, let's tackle this this notion of a time delay, suppression rebound hypothesis. And so we found one study from this 2012 paper where they suggested that actually no, thoughts related to death are most easily accessible immediately after you make people aware of their own mortality. And we were, sort of along the same lines of, yeah, we think that that probably makes the most sense. And I'll talk about sort of the implications here at the end. But so, our goal became to, all right, well, let's check that element of the theory. So we selected this one study from Trafimow and Hughes, 2012. It was study 3. And we went through the review process and made a few modifications. Probably the biggest was that we added an additional DV. And this was between groups, so people got one DV or the other DV. But the DV that was used in the original study turns out to be a less popular way of measuring what they call death thought accessibility. I'll talk about what that is in just one second. So we added an additional DV in addition to what they originally had in the study. And then we went out, recruited, as you do, recruited participating labs. And of course, this necessitated some multilingual support. So we had our original study materials translated into Dutch, German, Turkish, Slovak, and Spanish. We then did back translations to English to verify them. And we used Luke. I should have the citation in there. This is Pennebaker's Linguistic Inquiry Word Count Dictionary for death-related words. We then used Google Translate into the target languages, and then had the participating labs verify the translations of those death-related words. So the approach that we used is, if you think about this, this is all online, all running on survey software, and participating labs would each lab basically got their own instantiation of the study software in their language or multiple languages. And from the outset, participants were assigned to one of 2 experimental groups to either write about their own death, so that is the death prime group, or to write about dental pain. And so the specific prompt was, please briefly describe the emotions that the thought of your own death arouses in you, and write as specifically as you can what you think will happen to you as you physically die and once you are physically dead. The control group was simply about dental pain. That's a very common control group in these experiments. So same question, same writing prompt, but about dental pain rather than death. Each participant was either assigned to be in either the delay group or the no delay group. So if they were in the delay group, they were sent to read an article and evaluate an article. It was just a travel article, sort of New York Times style article, and then just provide some responses. It was theoretically, I think the prompt we gave was something to the effect of, we're trialing some new materials for a different study. Please read and evaluate this piece. If you were in the no delay category, you got right to the DTA assessment. So that was the either the word fragment completion, word fragment task, or the word completion task. And this was something like one of these. So this is the word fragment completion task. Participants were asked to basically fill in the blanks for each of these words, some of which have targets that could be related to death. So bury, BUR blank blank D could be buried. COFF could be coffee, but it could also be coffin. And the word generation task was sort of similar, but basically just asked participants to basically arrange a series of letters into 5 separate words. And then we gave them a box for each response. And then just counting in both cases the number of death-related words that participants provided. The idea being that more death-related words means death is more easily accessible. So that's sort of the completion there. Just to sort of give everybody a sort of a sense of what we're doing here, because I know I've talked about a bunch of different stuff, and this can easily be difficult to wrap your head around. We basically wound up with 5 separate analyses. So we had an exact replication of the original study. The experimental group in that was the writing about your death group. And then the comparison group was basically every other condition. We also did a version of this where we just compared death, both delay and non-delay, to the dental pain condition, just to see if we could actually get people to, we could prime people to think about their own death. And we looked at that for both the word generation task and the word fragment task. And then we did a straightforward direct comparison of the death delay condition to the death no delay condition, again, with both the word generation and word fragment tasks. The kind of thing that you can do if you have 22 separate labs collecting data, because you have a nice large N. So we did this, and I'll get to the sort of post-mortem and lesson learned here in just a second, but just to answer the question, this is just one of many forest plots that shows that yes, you can prime people to think about their death, and it seems to work better with if you assess death thought accessibility immediately rather than after a delay, which, depending on who you talk to, is somewhat inconsistent with terror management theory. But basically, this is just the finding that just says it's possible to get people to think about, to prime people to think about their death. Okay, so let's get to the sort of the I guess what I'll call sort of the good, exciting parts. Why did this project take 9 years? And I'm going to throw myself under the bus completely here. I have lots of things that make me bad at managing this kind of project, and I was very interested to hear Professor Duckworth's comments on that about project management. I'm pretty sure I agree with everything she said in the last session. So, you know, I have ADHD. And actually, more interestingly, I didn't know that I had ADHD until November of last year. So I was unaware of the fact that I have this problem and the fact that it was untreated at the time. That's not good. I have too many jobs while all this is going on. I'm trying to get tenure. I co-founded a tech startup. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I do too much stuff. And I'm just not dispositionally good at managing large projects. More to the point, I'm bad at pestering people to do things. So a lot of, you know, the time that was taken up was just the fact that, you know, we would have one round of translations and, you know, one person was supposed to, you know, do the sort of reverse translation back to English so we could verify everything. And I'd send them an email and say, hey, please do this. And then a month would go by and I just wouldn't pester them to do it because I don't like pestering people to do things. Along the same lines of the translation process, I am your stereotypical monolingual American, so I can't help with any of that. So that's not good. Some of this was delays due to the publishing process. We had a couple of different rounds of peer review. One reviewer, actually, I believe we had to swap out for another. All of this took place during COVID-19, and you know how much that exactly would affect. It's an online study, so you can ask, all right, how much of this is actually going to affect our ability to do this research? Fair enough. But at the same time, if some of you may recall, it was just not a good time to be doing anything, even if it was something that you could do from your computer. There was just too much going on, at least in my world. And then just to sort of top everything off, as we completed the project and sent it off to be published, we had already posted a preprint of the paper along with the data and the analysis code. And after we had sent the final version off and it was actually in production, we were contacted by David Lischner and Christopher Groves at University of Wisconsin Oshkosh. And they notified us that hey, we think we found some coding errors. Actually, just one error, but one really substantial error that basically uh, made participants receive all 0 scores for DVs that they were not assigned to. Um, didn't really affect any of the fundamental conclusions, but definitely affected all of the results, and all of that sort of had to be uh, redone. There were a couple of conclusions that we had to go in there about which DV is better, but yeah, just the kind of thing, the icing on the cake, so to speak. Um, so what can we say about this in terms of lessons learned for big team science? I was really happy to see. So, Aaron mentioned in the last session, Staple. Is it called Staple? I think it's Staple something, Staple
Yes,
Science. Thank you.
staple. Yeah.
I love this. This is amazing. I really, really, really wish that it existed when I was doing this project because, OSF is nice, but it's not project management software. And, we just ended up using a combination of Google Docs and Google Sheets to sort of manage everything. And it was not good. So I'm very happy to see, because I actually was looking at this when I was putting together this talk. I was like, what kind of project management software is there for multi-lab triple R projects? And I couldn't find anything until Aaron mentioned that in the last session, and I was just playing with it briefly as we were wrapping up with Professor Duckworth's talk. And so I'm very excited that this exists, and thank you for making it. That's a huge win in my mind. Um, you know, be proactive in following up with participating labs. This occurred to me, I was reflecting on this, I actually appreciate it when people come back to me and say, "Hey, Sean, you should do the thing. Remember the thing you said you would do? You need to do the thing." I actually like that. I appreciate it when people do that because I'm bad at remembering to do the thing. And probably, bugging people, not too much, but nudging people. I shouldn't say bugging, I'll say nudging people. Again, commensurate with our last talk. That may actually help people, may help the people you're trying to get to do something, not just the project itself. Um, Being practical, the perfect is the enemy of the good. And one thing that happened after, data collection was ongoing when COVID-19 hit. And one thing that happened, initially, because there's a global pandemic, we're doing a study about people's awareness of their own mortality. Do you think there could be some connection between these two things? And so I kind of like hit the panic button and was like, all right, well, we need to, monitor and document when each participating institution, when their campus closes down, key events at each of these study sites. And we tried to do this for a brief period of time, but it quickly became apparent that there was just logistically no way of making this happen. So that was an issue that we just had to drop. You can also learn some things from actual professional software engineers. So there's this concept in software engineering called unit tests, which are where you break your code down into individual chunks and test them individually. So anytime you make a change to the core code, you can see if everything else still works. Um, and if you're just doing a one-off, sort of one study analysis, you don't need that. If you're doing something at this level of complexity or greater, you should at least consider that sort of thing. It would have probably caught the coding error that I mentioned earlier, would have probably saved a lot of time and energy in retrospect. Um, and I should also note we did all this without funding. The only real expense was the survey system, which I maintain myself. My department, members of my faculty, the faculty here at Murray State use it. So it was sort of already there, and so there wasn't really any need for materials or anything like that. But certainly funding could have been used to pay for translations. Statistical consulting would have been helpful. Robert, who Aaron and I were discussing earlier, one of my co-authors, Robert Kalen Jagerman, was very helpful in with the actual analysis code itself and sort of some of the nuances of the statistical packages that we use for the primary analysis. So all of that, obviously funding is helpful. The last thing that I'll just say is that, some people have pointed out that, systematizing this sort of thing, is very good. And I am a big fan of everything that, that y'all are doing at Psychological Science Accelerator. All of that I think is excellent. And this sort of project, as I'm sure all provide evidence that might be missed from separate replication attempts. If you just look at the forest plots in our paper and you think to yourself, okay, what would happen if I had just seen that one study in isolation? What would I have concluded? Very different picture than what you get seeing all of them together. In terms of like, what do we do with terror management theory? Um, in my opinion, there's mixed evidence regarding the core of the theory, and there's a meta-analysis, Chen et al., that actually I just discovered like a couple of weeks ago, that actually sort of gets at this through a number of different techniques, and just sort of kind of concludes that, we're not sure. Our results show that you can prime people to think about death. Fair enough. But I think actually you can interpret our results as being a bit more critical in that it doesn't seem that there's that death suppression rebound effect going on, which to my mind actually makes me a little bit more skeptical of terror management theory because it kind of suggests that there's nothing special about this. This is all that we did in our study was actually prime people to think about death. And there's a big literature on all of that. So I tend to be more critical of TMT, but obviously the word is nothing is finalized. So the word still an open question in my mind. So yeah, that's all I've got. I will stop the screen sharing and yeah, we got a few minutes for questions. So
Yes. I'm happy to have folks just unmute and ask questions since we're a smaller group. I will say that I'm also happy to take feedback on the software. We're starting running, was funded by NASA, and we're running a couple of big team projects in it now. And every week, my PhD student is like, "Can you add this button?" So happy to take that feedback from folks as well. Self-promotion here.
no, that's excellent. Yeah.
I do, I'll start with, if you were to do this again, what would you do differently? I really enjoyed how self-reflective your this was difficult slide was. So what would you do differently if you had to do one of these again?
Um, since we're being self-reflective, start the ADHD meds sooner rather than later. I mean, I'm being kind of facetious here and kind of, but it really is true. Be self-aware and your mental health matters. I don't have to convince anyone here of that. But it actually affects your ability to do your job, and so I think be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. Acknowledging that I'm not good at managing large projects would have probably allowed me to make a different series of decisions. Probably would have involved I would have involved our GAs more in the project in terms of actually
Mhm.
managing it going forward. I am
Mhm.
bad at asking for help,
Mhm.
and so asking for help would have been the number one thing probably that I would put up there. So, but that
Fair.
may be more of a me thing than anyone else. So
Well, I resonate with that as
there you
well.
go. Thank
So,
you.
other folks. Shucks. None so far. I was trying to think. I had one on terror management theory, but it jumped out of my head now. So you're probably using the Luke 15 when you did this. One of my former students worked on that, so I'm partial.
Okay.
And so do you think if you went back and kind of coded some of that differently with some of the newer updates or, all this large language stuff that we're working on now, you might see different, you wouldn't see, I guess, different priming maybe, but would you see different results that involved that kind of linguistic analysis?
Yeah, I mean, my own sense is that probably not, just because those outcome variables are very straightforward, and list. I mean, is it a death related word or not? I suppose you could make the argument that, well, you could give a more expansive definition of a death related word with the fragment completion task. We did actually look at some of that raw data, and I just didn't really see anything pop out as being sort of an edge case.
Okay.
And so, my sense is probably not. Initially, we did have actually the plan was to have people manually review all that data. Um, But right, exactly. A face you made, Aaron, is exactly the right response to that.
I teach NLP, so I'm
Oh,
like, no, don't
of
do that.
course. Right. Yes, of
Yeah.
course. Why would you do that? I hate myself is the reason why I would do that. No, but yeah, no, it's a perfect task to do automatically, and I don't think that any of the sort of newer advances are necessarily going to change that because again, it's just is it one of these words or not?
Okay.
Um, but
Bjorn, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. I was wondering, I guess you would say that your results go against the prevailing theories in terror management theories, at least to some extent, right? Do you feel
that's
that
my
that
position. I should just clarify that's my
yeah.
position. I don't. I'm not going to speak for any of my co-authors. There was actually
Mhm.
some tension in terms of how we characterized everything, and so, but yes, that's my position. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think the feedback you got was different due to having at least more ambiguous findings than if it was like a clear-cut support?
If it was what? I'm sorry, the last thing you said.
The feedback you got from the community based on your findings, do you think they responded differently? Did they raise methodological concerns that they wouldn't otherwise?
Yeah, so I mean, so what we've heard so far is so basically there's this sort of like, why is it taking everyone so long to get rid of this idea of inserting a delay
Yeah.
between the two, right? I mean, if you look at the literature, I mean, that's a very key component of how it's studied.
Yeah.
Which is I think that's a really interesting question. There's a commentary piece that Trafimow wrote that basically is just sort of asking that question. Um, I think there's another listener in Groves wrote a reply to it that I actually I'm working on a reply to their reply, but I disagree. They have some very good points in there, but I disagree with a lot of it. I think it's a sort of more of a meta science question of how do we what kind of evidence do triple R's provide, and they're skeptical. I think they're skeptical is
Mm.
the way to characterize that. Um, but yeah, so I guess it hasn't necessarily the feedback has not really changed my mind about the theory itself so far. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. We also published a null finding of the TMT, and we
oh,
didn't use a delay. And so some people wrote off our null finding since we didn't have a delay there, right? So I wish I had your finding at that time.
well, now hey, better late than never, I guess. That's interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It was really interesting. I appreciate both sides, what happened and the self-reflection. I don't think we could do that at all at the end of these studies. And the recording will be available later for folks if they're interested. But I think it's time to move on to the next session. So thank
Sounds
you again,
good. Sorry for
Sean,
taking
for
up. Yep,
coming.
yep. Thank you.